Hello everybody, this is Petrikov here, and today on V Rising, we're going to be working with the Dunley Militia. Hope you all enjoy it. Okay guys, so this is the lowest tiered unit for the Militia Light. These guys are very similar to the Thugs, but they do have a few differences. One of which is they're a little more tanky, they have a little bit more damage, but the biggest difference is they swing side to side instead of up and down. So I actually would consider these guys quite a bit better, but at this point you're already at mid game to near late game, so I would still label these guys as a 1-star defender. I wouldn't really want to have this as a defender, especially since I only have 9 slots, guys. It would just be a waste. I suggest that if you find a high level one, you turn it into a blood servant, not a defender. Okay guys, so this is another unit very similar to the Bandit Archer. It does do more damage, it can do critical shots, but generally its movement and its attack pace is about the same. They are a bit more tanky, they are a little bit more reliable, but I would give these guys a rating of 2 stars. I still consider this type of unit to be a trash defender. If you find a high level one, honestly, like high level as far as the blood, I'd honestly, like I said, turn it into a blood servant, not a defender servant. I'll go into that later. Alright guys, so now I'm going to show you a good blood servant. I really wouldn't ever use these guys as a defender, but let me go ahead and tell you a bit more of what a blood servant is. It's somebody that you put into a cage and you use their blood type and you farm it, so that way you can constantly get more. At the end of this video I'll be explaining how you can do that, but generally I would never use these guys as a defender. Even though they do have some abilities to get resources, I personally think it's not worth it because you need resources and other people need resources. So if they take those resources from you, regardless, it just means you gave them more. So I wouldn't use these as defenders. Alright, so this is another blood servant type. It's another villager, but instead of worker, it has scholar. Now this makes them a bit more interesting for gathering resources, but like I said with the other villagers, I really wouldn't use them as a defender. I honestly would give them a 0 in defense, no stars. So blood types, I would check these out because they are worth it for blood servants. Both villager types are incredibly valuable. I would search for them if I were you. Alright guys, so now I'm going to show you the Torchbearer. These guys are very similar to the Light Militia, but they do have one unique ability. They have this torch right here. Now, what I normally would say is they only activate them when they're getting struck at or if you're backing away from them. Now, there's a big issue with this ability. It can hurt your own. It is incredibly damaging, but like I said, it will make your tanks suffer because they won't get out of the way of the fire, but your enemies will. So this is a damage dealer that will do more damage to your own group. I'd honestly give this guy a 1 star as far as a defender is concerned. These guys just don't make the cut. Alright guys, here is an interesting one. This is the guard, the new mugger, basically. He is the upgraded version. He does have a nice shield bash, and he has a faster attack. But one of the unfortunate things is he doesn't activate his shield quite as fast. The mugger will go every 3 strikes. He's more like 4. But he makes up for it for that shield bash that slows the enemy down and pushes them away. They are a little harder to dodge. I think they're pretty good. I'd give them a 3-star in defense. They're a solid frontliner. There are better in the Dunley areas, and we'll be going over them in a little bit, but I still think that a stun unit is a pretty good unit to have. Alright, so this is the up-and-comer of the Deadeye with a few differences. They have an ability to basically shoot a grenade arrow, a fire arrow. But there's a big Achilles heel to this one, much like the Torchbearer. They hurt their own allies. They are probably the biggest damage dealers in the Dunley area, but they'll be doing that to your own allies too. And that generally, I kind of believe, is unacceptable. And I would say if you have any sort of front line, I'd give this guy a 2-star. Otherwise, maybe a 4. Alright, so here is the new bomber. This unit is unfortunately a bit of a downgrade in my opinion. Now, the bomb explosion does not hurt its allies, but the fire in fact does. And this is actually one of the most destructive of the Dunley groups because I don't have to do much and that bomber will eventually kill everyone else. Now, damage wise, great unit. They do quite a bit of damage. Especially since they make a persistent fire area, it makes it so you have to deal with a lot to kill them. But it just wouldn't work out with any other unit in your group. I really don't think that these guys work well with anyone else. And with that in mind, I would label these as a 1-starred unit for defense due to that alone because they're burning each other up, guys. So they can't even really group together. It just unfortunately is a thing that I think the admins need to fix, the creators of this game. I don't know if they're going to, but until then, they're just not worth grabbing. They're just destructive and they'll just be used to destroy your own base. So this unit is pretty interesting. It's called the Bellringer. It has the ability to alert your allies, alert your servants to an intruder. They will run around trying to find all your troops and leading them to the intruders. So that is actually pretty handy when you have your guys in different rooms or all across the base and you have a large area where they're not all going to aggress at once. Now, I think that's a really cool ability, but generally there's a flaw with that design. He takes one of your slots, and generally I think that you shouldn't spread your troops around because they're going to get picked off. And this guy is generally about as tanky as a normal villager, so there's some flaws in relying on this character. So I would rate him as a 2-star. But if you do want to have your people spread out, he is the one you need. Alright guys, so here's one of the most solid units that the Militia can offer you. This is the Brawler. They have a lot of unique abilities. They have their swing does a lot of damage. They have a good shield bash. And they also have a charge ability. Now generally you can kind of see the weakness of the charge right there. But they are incredibly tanky. They're probably the most tanky of all the units of the Militia. So I really do recommend these guys. They're a solid choice. There is some flaws with them. One of them being they will charge forward and move faster than the rest of your units. And the reason why that's a bad thing is because they can kind of pull them away and then have them focus their fire on this guy alone, picking him off. So I would recommend having 2 or 3 of these guys. 2 would be the more comfortable number. And I would rate these guys as a 4-star for mid and a 3-star for late game. It's a really solid unit, guys. I recommend them. Alright guys, so here is the cream of the Dunley crop, the Nun. She's a fantastic support unit. She does a decent amount of damage, but her attacks are slow, but that's not where her abilities shine. Her abilities shine in her healing powers. The moment any of her allies get hurt, she starts going into healing mode, and she creates an AoE that will slow down enemies and heal her allies. It's a solid unit, guys, and it doesn't take her very long to get back into healing, so she's already starting to throw that out there. Now, I'd rate this as a 5-star defender. I'd rate this as a 5-star in early, mid, and late game. This is a solid unit. Now, I'd only recommend having 1 because the return is diminished if you get more than 1 of them. I would turn these into 3 stars after you start getting more than 1. Just because they just don't do enough damage and their healing is enough for 1. I recommend them, guys. You can't go wrong. Now here's an interesting mix between a long range and a short range unit. This is a mid-guard unit, the Devoted. They have a interesting shield ability. It doesn't stun, but it knocks you back. And they also have an interesting ranged ability. Now, it's holy damage, so that's nice, but it is slow. As long as the enemy knows it's coming, they can dodge it fairly easily. but it does do a decent amount of damage, guys. I suggest these guys are a fairly good hybrid to deal with, especially when you've got a group of people. Their shield is fairly handy at keeping the DPS down on his allies. You saw right there, one of them just threw one of their spells out. I would rate these guys as a 3-star, honestly, due to the fact that people can use potions and stuff to kind of negate the damages. But also due to the fact that they are a jack of traits and an expert of none. But for versatility, they are fairly good. I think if you wanted to have a more long-range grouping, these guys might be a good front-line unit for you. Alright, we're going to do a quick overview on blood servants on this video. Blood servants are used to gather blood for yourself, so you can maintain a blood type. So let's go ahead and look at this warrior. He's at 100%. But you can also see he has a misery of 20%. Misery is the added amount of damage they take whenever you drain blood. So you want to reduce that whenever possible because they're going to lose more health every time. In order to drain blood, you're going to need a bottle and click Drain Blood. These abilities right here are the items you need to either get their health up or to reduce the misery or both. It's very important to gather all these items, guys. Specifically, the rainbow trout and the sagefish. They're very important. Now, each one of these guys have different abilities with their blood, and it's going to be one of your greatest treasures, guys. It's going to be something that you're going to need to have all of them eventually, and it will define you as a power on your server. Alright, so now let's go through an overview of some of the units I was talking about and what I believe would be the proper composition. Now, since you're coming out of the bandit area, I would recommend getting like 2 brawlers, I'd recommend getting a guard and establish your front line, and I'd also recommend getting a nun to keep them alive. I wouldn't necessarily go after any of the long-range units in this grouping, mostly because they're just too damaging to your front line. They do a lot of damage, guys, and they are fairly effective. So if you want to just have a shock and awe all archers group, that's an option for you. But if the enemy's clever, they can get away from it pretty easily. Now, to each their own, and each has their own potential, and I have only one point of view. So build, explore, test it out, guys. I look forward to seeing some build composition. But all in all, I'd recommend supplementing your bandit group with their stun abilities and the new tanky abilities of the Dunley units. That's generally how I would build that. And I hope you guys have a good experience in this game, and I hope to see you again in my next video.